Hello, my lovely juvelies, and welcome to another story. Today I'm going to be reading May I Sleep on You by jkbrony. Twilight yawned with the weariness of a long day as she meticulously levitated the final book from a now empty pile onto a shelf in her castle's library. Her day had largely been spent sorting through hundreds and hundreds of knowledge-filled tomes, finding proper places for them on overly descriptive shelves, whilst occasionally distracting herself with one or two for a good hour, or longer. "Great!" she exclaimed once the book was securely in place. "My new library now consists 45% of books from Canterlot's Castle's library, 17% of books from the Crystal Empire's library, and 38% of books from Celestia and Luna's old castle." As Twilight looked around the neatly placed tomes which now occupied every inch of every shelf, she was suddenly struck with a vague impression that something was decidedly wrong about this arrangement, and her expression of content immediately faded. She raised a hoof to her chin and tentatively squinted her eyes. "Maybe I should even it out a bit more," she suggested to herself. "With approximately 18 more books from the Crystal Empire's library, I could raise it to 20%. But that would mean having to return 18 books of the old castle to reduce it to 35%, and I'm not sure I really want to do that. Then again, maybe I own too many books from Canterlot's library. 45% is almost half after all." She stood in place for several minutes, mulling several ideas back and forth in her head while rapidly tapping her hoof with a subtle frustration at her own indecision. Feeling too tired to continue thinking it over, she ultimately gave up, struggling with uncertainty. "I guess I'll figure it out tomorrow," she said to herself, yawning again. "Time to get some shut-eye." Twilight trotted carefully up the stairs to her bedroom, thankful that she was now starting to feel a little more at home within the massive castle. As far as overall comfort and homeliness went, she was certain that it would likely never replace Golden Oak's library. Nevertheless, having a house full of books again was a sure sign that things were becoming more normal, even if they were not the same books she had managed to grow so fond of over the years. Upon entering her bedroom, Twilight noticed that a certain infant dragon was seated upon the side of her bed with heavy indications of boredom and exhaustion visible on his face. "Spike, I figured you'd be asleep by now. It's pretty late," Twilight noted. The young dragon shook his head and pointed to the small, empty, basket-like bed which sat directly beside hers. "I'm not sleeping in that thing tonight," he stated with a hostile glare. Twilight blinked with confusion. Okay. Well, there's plenty of rooms for you to choose. That's why..." Spike interrupted nervously, removing himself from her bed. "May I sleep on you tonight?" Twilight blinked again with increased confusion. "Huh?" "May I sleep on you?" Spike repeated, fidgeting uncomfortably. "Like, on your barrel." Twilight raised a curious eyebrow at him. Throughout their years together, Spike had gradually become more and more independent as he continued to grow. Thus, a request like this certainly struck her as more than a bit unusual. However, the level of apprehension and anxiety she saw in his face made it clear that he was nothing less than dead serious. Spike, aren't you a little old for that now?" Twilight asked dismissively. "I know you're still a baby technically, but in pony years you'd definitely be a colt by now." Spike nodded, frowning with disappointment, as though he expected this kind of reply. "I know, but just for one night, please." The desperation in his voice increased, and Twilight realized that she would not be able to deny him without severely hurting his feelings and making herself feel remorseful for doing it. I'm a bit confused," she stated hesitantly. "Why do you want to sleep with me all of a sudden?" Spike instantly grinned with a sense of confidence, having been waiting for her to ask this very question. "I figured you wanted to know," he said boastfully. "And I put together a very compelling argument with some very good reasons as to why I want to sleep with you tonight and why you should let me." "Oh, is that so?" Twilight said, giggling at the absurdity. "Well, I'd love to hear it." Spike stepped forward and cleared his throat, preparing to deliver his so-called compelling argument, in the hope that it would persuade his favorite pony to serve as his bed for the night. For the sake of humoring this humorous idea, Twilight lowered her flank to the ground, ears perked, and open for whatever her enthusiastic baby dragon would say. "The first reason is, you're soft," Spike began. "Really soft, and I wouldn't have any trouble falling asleep on you, and I wouldn't even need a pillow." "Beds are soft too, Spike," Twilight replied with a chuckle, feeling slightly embarrassed by his words. "Well, you're also warm," he responded. "Really warm. I probably wouldn't even need a blanket either." "So I'm soft and warm, huh?" questioned Twilight, rubbing her chin inquisitively. Is that all? Well, not exactly, Spike stammered, casually scratching behind his head. But how's my argument going so far? Sorry, but you're going to have to give me a little bit more than that, Spike, Twilight answered, teasing him with a gratifying shake of her head. Okay, Spike said with a disappointed sigh. He paused for a while and bit his lip with premature humiliation, hoping that Twilight would not laugh at what came out of his mouth next. He had debated, fought, and battled heavily with himself over whether or not to include the next reason in his argument, yet ultimately decided that, as embarrassing that it was, it would only end up doing more good than harm. Or so he hoped. He stiffened as discomfort trickled down each and every one of his scales. Twilight's impatient eyes peered down on him overbearingly, causing his legs to tremble. It suddenly felt as though he was back at the Equestria Games, standing just before the massive torch he had been so eager to light prior to realizing how many sets of eyes would be watching him do it. Finally, the infant dragon swallowed hard and snapped his eyes tightly shut, resigning himself to force the words quickly out of his mouth before he had a chance to stop them. "You smell nice!" he cried, instantly shoving his palms into his face in an attempt to hide his blushing. Twilight stared at him blankly for a moment, and then curiously tilted her head. "Really?" "Yeah," Spike whimpered, eyes still shut. "Oh," Twilight replied, the purple of her cheeks glinting brightly as her own embarrassment soared. What do I smell like?" Spike cautiously lowered his hands and reopened his eyes, relieved that Twilight had not laughed at him after all, and even more relieved that she just appeared to be as uncomfortable as he was. "It's kind of hard to explain," he said apprehensively. "The only way I can really describe it is by saying that you smell like you, and I can't really compare it to anything. But it's a very nice scent, and I like it. It's very familiar to me." "It is?" "Yeah," Spike answered with a single nod. "I think it's your natural scent. I remember it from a long time ago when we used to play together." "I see," Twilight said, smiling, her cheeks still reddened. "I'm getting a bit sleepy, Spike, so—" "I only have 2 more, he said. "I'm listening," she replied with a yawn, hoping that whatever he said next would not embarrass her further. "I want to listen to your heartbeat," Spike said without hesitation. "Oh, why?" Twilight responded, tilting her head again. "We've been through a lot ever since you and our friends started defending Equestria," he explained. "We've faced a lot of dangers and will probably face more in the future, and that scares me, especially since things seem to be getting more dangerous as we continue moving forward. Just last week, our home was destroyed and you were left to face Tirek on your own. There's so much that could have happened, and there's no telling where we'd be right now if you have never received your key to open the box. That's why I want to listen to your heartbeat. I just want to be reminded that you're still here. That we're both still here." "Oh, Spike." Twilight's eyes glistened with affection for her little dragon, and she struggled to fight back fledgling tears. No longer did this plight seem so absurd. No longer did it seem like something to tease him over or not to take seriously. Spike returned her affectionate look, taking it as confirmation that he was finally and thankfully getting somewhere with his argument. "What's the last one?" Twilight asked. "Well, I won't be a baby dragon forever, Twi," said Spike. "I don't exactly know how my growth works outside of what happens when, well, you know. But as of now, I'm small enough that I can sleep on you, and I really want to take advantage of that every now and then, because I know one day I won't be." His argument now finished, Spike stood entirely still, preparing himself for Twilight's response. Twilight stared at him silently for a moment, then finally raised herself back on all fours. She cleared her throat the same way Spike had just before he began, then sternly closed her eyes and pointed her nose upward to display a false sense of callousness. "Well, Spike, after careful consideration of your argument, I have decided—" She paused for several seconds, deliberately prolonging her answer. Spike stared at her with wide, shimmering eyes, clutching his hands together tightly as he impatiently awaited her final words, each second passing by as a minute. "That you have permission to sleep on me tonight," she finished, instantly replacing her callous look with that of a comforting smile. "Yes!" Spike cried with an energized hop, elated by his victory. He grinned widely and rushed forward to wrap his tiny arms around as much of Twilight's body as he could. "Thanks, Twilight," he said as he nuzzled against her forelegs. "You're absolutely right," Twilight replied, tenderly wrapping a hoof around him. "You're not going to be my little baby dragon forever. I guess sometimes it just feels like we have so much time since it took you almost a decade to grow from a hatchling to a baby. But one day, you're gonna grow even more. I know, Twi, Spike said mournfully. His growth was not something he liked to even think about, much less talk about. We really have been through a lot, haven't we? Said Twilight, clutching him even tighter as tears began to stream down her cheeks. Sometimes I don't even think about it. In fact, I can't even remember how many times I nearly lost you. Spike frowned at the sight of her tears. It's okay, Twi. No, it isn't. Twilight shook her head. Maybe I took you too much for granted. Maybe I didn't stop and think enough about everything you provide for me, not the least of which is just your company, so that I don't have to live in this big castle all by myself. Twilight, really, it's okay, Spike said, placing a comforting hand on her wet cheek. I know how much you appreciate me. Twilight sighed, wiping her tears away. She had not expected to shed any tonight, certainly not from the very argument that she initially found so amusing. From now on, you may sleep on me any time you feel the need, okay? Twilight said. You don't even need to ask, and you don't need to put together another argument either. A wide grin once again spread across Spike's face. You mean it? If this is something I can do to show my love and appreciation for you a bit more, then of course, she said with a nod. Spike gratefully wrapped his arms across Twilight's forelegs again, and she fell into a short fit of giggles. Come on, let's get some sleep. Together, they climbed into Twilight's bed. Spike gently planted himself vertically upon her torso, low enough that his spines lay just beneath her chin. As she magically pulled the blanket over both of them, he was able to feel her softness and warmth penetrating into his own skin, just as he knew it would. Surely enough, he would require no pillow tonight, and the blanket only served to make his back as warm as his front. Twilight's familiar scent sailed elegantly through his nostrils, instantly bringing him back to the day she first played with him, bouncing around in circles while he blissfully clutched his arms tightly around her neck, holding on for dear life. Twilight's forelegs wrapped around him tightly, pressing his ear closer to her barrel so that he was able to hear the gentle thumping of her heart. Her presence was now fully evident in Spike's senses, and no longer did he need any further reminding of her existence. What fears he had of the unknown dangers that awaited them in the future would not disturb him throughout the night, not so long as the sound of her heartbeat filled his ears, warding them away. Good night, Spike, Twilight said with a yawn. Good night, Twi, Spike replied, yawning himself. They fell into silence for several minutes as they waited for sleep to overtake them. Spike nestled himself as deeply as he could into Twilight's coat. Twi? She replied, half asleep, her eyes remaining closed. I love you. Twilight smiled. I love you too, Spike, and I always will. Spike twitched gleefully on Twilight's body, unable to contain his happiness to a mere curl of his mouth. He knew in that moment that there was absolutely nowhere else in the world he would rather be sleeping tonight. He continued to listen to Twilight's heartbeat until it gracefully sang him to sleep. Yay! It's another heartwarming fic. I love these ones. It makes my heart go, but not in a painful way, you know? Anyway, so yeah, I really like this story. Nice, sweet, heart-swelling goodness between Spike and Twilight. Sparkle Spike. Yeah. And it's just like, it's a relationship between families, which is nice, you know? It's almost like a mother-son relationship. If the son was a completely different species and the mother was a magical talking miniature equine. Anyway, I hope you liked that little story. I know I did. In the meantime, this is Kiyomana signing off. Goodbye and good luck. She cleared her throat the same way Spike had just before he began, then slowly closed her eyes and pointed her nose upward to display a false sense of callousness. She cleared her throat the same way I just did to remove all of my lungs from my throat. He grinned widely and rushed forward to wrap his tiny arms around as much of Twilight's body as she magically pulled the blanket over both of them. I thought he said he wouldn't even need a blanket. What a liar. Twilight's familiar scent sailed elegantly through his nostrils. Twilight's familiar scent sailed eagerly through his nostrils, instantly bringing them back to the day she first played with him. That sentence was infinitely more creepy. Alright.